The hay is in the barn. My Buffalo Bills 2024 NFL Draft Board is set. We're diving into that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. It's done. All of my evaluations for the 2024 NFL Draft are completed, and I'm excited to work through my Buffalo Bills specific big board with you here today. A link to the board is available for you in today's show notes. So if you'd like to have a visual component to go with this conversation about the board, you can check that out in the show notes. There is a link that you can access the document that shows you both the horizontal and the vertical board. I hope that this is a valuable resource for you to accompany you on draft day. As you're watching the draft, cross off the names as they are picked, and that should give you a pretty clear idea of what direction I think the Bills should go with their picks when they are on the clock. I did mention there is a vertical board and a horizontal board. I think the horizontal board is so much better. It's so much more useful. The vertical board is just a list. It's just a list of players in order of how they are graded, highest to lowest. The horizontal board is what visually shows you the talent cliffs and distribution of talent in the draft. And I think that is what really helps inform draft day decisions. The horizontal board also eliminates the tedious splitting hairs conversations that can often come with looking at a board where, you know, you could really get into the weeds on, well, why is this player graded higher than this one? And it's like, well, the grades are really close. Sometimes it's literally just a fraction of a point. So you can have those types of conversations if you want in terms of how they're stacked, but the margins are very, very close. The important thing for me is the valuation. What is the appropriate range to draft a player? And that's why I really prefer the horizontal board. I think it just leads to better conversations, and it's a better visual representation of how the talent is dispersed throughout the class. I will also note that this is 100% my personal evaluation of the prospects. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing about this is meant to be predictive in terms of where players get drafted. I repeat, this is 100% my personal evaluation of the prospects. Nothing is meant to be predictive. So if my number 10 player gets drafted 75 overall, or my number 80 player gets drafted 15th overall, that's not important to me. We'll find out who was right in 3 years from now, but this is my personal assessment of these players and how I value them through the lens of the Buffalo Bills. Now, I did evaluate 170 prospects for the 2024 NFL Draft. I would have loved to have done more. I'll be honest, I'm still adjusting to life where I don't work full-time in draft media. So instead of evaluating the class for literally the entire year, which I did when I was in draft media full-time, it's now like a 5-month window for me starting in December. But the point that I'm really making with that is if the player is not on my board, then I didn't evaluate that player. And so if the Bills do draft a player that I didn't evaluate, which will probably happen, probably more than one time, I will evaluate that player before discussing their skill set on the podcast. So I will come to you with an informed perspective as I discuss any player that the Buffalo Bills draft. And that's going to be a big part of this weekend Podcasts are coming all weekend long. I'm not going to just rest around because the draft's happening and get to it on Monday. We are going to have a lot of episodes coming this weekend, so don't miss any of that. Make sure that you are subscribed. A couple other notes here. The prospects are scored numerically, and I have the same process year over year, which I really enjoy. I have 10 different position-specific categories that I grade each prospect through. 9 of them are traits that you would get from film study. 1 is based on size and athleticism. So 9 film-specific traits, and then 1 that is size and athleticism. So about 10% of my grades factor in size and athleticism. 90% is what the tape reveals to me. I also have a discretionary 5 points, where for any player, I have the opportunity to move them up or down. 5 points in any direction based on factors like medicals, off-the-field concerns, age, things like that. Sometimes there's a player that doesn't score super high for me on tape where I also move them up, where I just feel like there's a lot of upside. There's youth. There's things that, I think are outside of the tape that or their athleticism or size that I think is worthy of pushing them up a little bit. So that 5 points can go in any direction. And then you'll also notice in looking through the draft board that there are tiers of players. I have top 10 grades, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round grades, and then, of course, undrafted free agents. I think it's important to know, well, what does a first round grade mean? What does a third round grade mean, right? Why are they in those particular categories? So if somebody has a top 10 grade from me, I am expecting a high impact starter, like one of the best players at their position in the entire NFL. If somebody has a first round grade from me, I'm expecting an impact starter in the NFL. If somebody has a second round grade, I'm expecting a quality starter. If somebody has a third round grade, I think this should be an adequate starter and or a key role player. So maybe they're not an every down player for you or, a primary starter, but what they do is really important. Think like receivers that aren't necessarily complete players, but they give you this like speed element down the field. So they're not like a starter, but what they do is a specialist type player. It really, really matters. For a fourth round grade, I'm expecting quality depth with starter appeal. I don't think that you're necessarily a starter. I think at a minimum, you're a good depth player, but in time you could be a starter. And the fifth round, I think of those prospects as developmental depth. That has some appeal, right? There's some ceiling there. In the sixth round, I think that's like baseline depth players. I don't think you're ever really going to be more than just a reserve. Seventh round prospects are just projects or guys that have really, really high floors, but not exciting ceilings, probably rosterable, maybe not, but more project-y type players. And then if you're an undrafted free agent grade, I think of you more as a practice squad type player. So there's all the process notes out of the way. I know that it's a lot of setup to get into the actual meat of the conversation, but if you don't understand the methodology, then none of the rest of the conversation is going to make that much sense to you. So thanks for bearing through that part of it. We're going to get into the exciting parts in just a second here, where we're going to get into the distribution of grades by position, by round, and then, of course, the actual meat and potatoes of this board and how it should inform the decisions for the Buffalo Bills on draft day. All of that's coming up here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. You shouldn't have to worry when you're looking to buy tickets for your next big event. Well, you don't have to, because Game Time is here for you, and it's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They specialize in last-minute ticket deals, and so maybe there's an event that you want to go to that you weren't able to get tickets to in advance, or maybe your availability changed at the last minute. You want to head to that concert or that comedy event or that game in your area. Game Time is the spot for you. They also give you flash deals. There's images of seats that you can check out. You're going to know exactly what it's going to be like when you get to the venue. And they also have a best price guarantee on an app that is super easy to navigate. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, let's get into this board. Let's talk about it. I want to give you my breakdown by positional grades and then what round grades as well, and then we're going to get into the actual board. So, again, my objective here was to grade the best 170 prospects. Over 250 prospects are going to get drafted. So as I work through the round grade buckets, understand that if I were to have done another 100 guys, they're probably going to be 6th or 7th round players. And so the later round buckets are not necessarily slam full of guys, and that's intentional. I wanted to prioritize the best players in the draft. So I got to 170, felt like that was about all I can get done this cycle. And that's why, as I say, I only have 2 7th round grades. That's because I tried not to watch 7th round prospects, if you will. So here's how it goes. I have 21 first round grades. 21 first round grades. That's a pretty normal number. Maybe the highest I've ever had is 23, 24. So this is a pretty normal amount of first round grades. And obviously the big conversation there as well, there's 32 players that are going to be picked in the first round. You got a math problem. Yep, you're exactly right. You never have 32 first round grades. I think the 49ers, John Lynch, their general manager, came out and said they think they had 22 first round grades. So it's a pretty normal amount. And that's what dictates decisions when you're going to trade up or down. Let's say you really want to get a player that you have graded in the first round, but that it's getting cleaned out as picks are happening and you want to go get one of those guys, right? That's why you would do it. Or let's say you get to your pick and you don't have any first round grades left. That's when you would maybe want to trade out of that position. So 21 is a pretty normal number. That's what I have for this year's class in terms of first round grades. Second round grades, I have 29 of those. Third round grades, I have 41. Fourth round grades, I have 31. Fifth round grades, I have 32. Sixth round grades, 14. And seventh round grades, 2. I think the big takeaway that I have in that information for the Buffalo Bills is not having a third round pick really hurts. Obviously, you'd love to not have the third round pick that you traded away for Rasul Douglas because that's really good. The third round pick that hurts is not getting that compensatory pick for Tremaine Edmunds. And just look at this breakdown. I have 21 first round grades, 29 second round grades. That equals 50. Well, there's 64 picks in the top 2 rounds, but I have 41 third round grades. That's the sweet spot of this draft. And the Bills don't have a pick there. And so that gives even more merit to the idea of trading back. Now, at 28, if one of your first round grades is available, pick them. But if it's close and you feel good about what you can trade back and get and you can recoup that 3, that'd be great because I really feel like that's the sweet spot of this draft is the third round. That's where the best valuations line up. And again, or at least in terms of the way I view this draft, I've only got 50 players in the top 2 rounds. So is there a chance some of that falls to you? And there's players that other teams have graded higher than you that pushes grades that you have in that appropriate range down? Yeah, that should happen. But you need it to happen a lot. The Bills pick 60th, and I have 50 top 2 round grades. Hopefully they can get one of those players at pick 60. So again, I think that not having that third round grade really hurts, and I'd love for Brandon Beane to find a way to recoup that. When it comes to positional breakdown among the top 100 players, again, I did 170. But when you look at my top 100, this is how I have it broken down by position. I have 6 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 19 wide receivers, 5 tight ends, 11 offensive tackles, 12 interior offensive linemen, so 23 total offensive linemen, 9 edge rushers, 8 defensive tackles, 4 linebackers, 12 corners, and 10 safeties. So you can see the strength of this draft: wide receiver, offensive line, secondary. I think that's really where you can find answers in this draft, and maybe to some extent the defensive line. And I think this is good news because the positions that I don't really think the Bills need, that's not where the draft is strong. The Bills don't need quarterbacks. The Bills don't need tight ends. The Bills don't need linebackers. So I'm very happy that the three positions that I don't think the Bills need are the three positions with the lowest amount of top 100 players in terms of how I view this class. So that's very good. Meanwhile, the positions that you do need, wide receiver, defensive line, secondary, those are the strongest positions in this draft. Now, I will say the Bills have a need at running back. I only have 4 top 100 running backs, but I don't necessarily think that they need to address the running back position with a top 100 pick. I think they'd be perfectly good to take advantage of the depth of the class at running back. So that is kind of a spot where the needs don't meet kind of the distribution of talent in this class. But if there was a position where you'd be okay with that, it would be running back, because I think the Bills need a specific type of running back that should be available for them in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round. So that's how I see the positional breakdown, the round grade breakdown. And now for the rest of this conversation, we are going to spend it looking at this draft board and really talking through things. In fact, we'll make that the entire last segment. That's coming up here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is the best place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Have you ever considered what you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you exercise, read, spend time with a loved one, catch up on some sleep? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters most to you so you can do more of it. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, folks, all of our remaining time will be spent looking through this draft board. And so if you're on YouTube, I'm going to put it on the screen. If you are not on YouTube, you can access it through a link in today's show notes. So I'm going to disappear, and here is the draft board. And so let's talk about this. And one of my main objectives in talking through this is identifying talent cliffs. You know, this, at least in terms of how I view this class, it should inform the decisions that the Buffalo Bills make. And again, I want to start off by pointing out, if you're looking at this, quarterback, tight end, and linebacker, you will see that there's just not a whole lot there in this year's class. And that is perfect, because I'm not convinced that the Bills need or should pick a player at any of those positions. Let's look at the wide receiver group. And I know that this is the hot topic of conversation for the Buffalo Bills. It's the most glaring need. It's also a position in this draft that is rich with talent. I mean, I have 19 receivers graded in the first 3 rounds of the draft, and there's some very appealing guys to me in the 4th or the 5th round. And this is good news. If the Bills are going to double dip at a position and it be wide receiver, you have to feel pretty good about being able to get one at maybe 28 and the 4th round. Maybe you trade back and get one in the, high 2nd round. That gets you a 3rd round pick back. You can maybe go, 2 of your first 3 picks. You have 2 2s and a 3 on wide receiver. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can address this position. And so I don't want you to get something confused. I'd love a wide receiver at pick 28. I would love it. I would be very satisfied. I just think it's very clear to me that in looking at this distribution of talent, and you consider the other needs on this team, that even if you don't pick it in the first round, you're still going to be able to get answers and reasonably good answers. If the right guy's there at 28, pick him. But it shouldn't trump getting a better player at a different position because the depth is so strong. I mean, to me, you look at this horizontal board and it stands out like a sore thumb. It is just consistent throughout in terms of the distribution of talent. And if you want size, if you want speed, it's all there. It's all there for you. If you want yards after catch, it's all there for you. So yes, let's get a wide receiver. Let's get two of them. But let's also be mindful of the depth of the class and the opportunities that should exist throughout the first several rounds of the draft. The next one I want to get to is edge rusher. I think this is the other position of big need for the Bills, where I feel like there's just a lot of opportunity for impact to be added. Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epenesa. I like AJ Epenesa. Is he more of a defensive end 2.5 than he is a defensive end 2? Probably. What can we really expect from Von Miller? And when you look at the edge rusher group, to me, there's a massive talent cliff after the first round. I like Leitu Latu, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, and Chop Robinson in the first round. Then I have 1 second-round grade. That's it, and Marshawn Nealon. And I have 2 third-round grades, Muhammad Kamara and Austin Booker. So the talent cliff is pretty steep. So it's going to be tough for the Bills to get, I think, a nice answer on the edge. Now, I also recognize that I'm a bit lower on some of the edge rushers that you kind of see ranked in the day 2 range, edge rushers that you see mocked in the day 2 range, guys like Adisa Isaac and Chris Braswell and Braylon Trice. Like, those guys didn't really move the needle for me on tape. So I admit that I'm lower on them, but that's the whole point of doing this, right? Is to assess this class. That way you can really critique and talk about it. If you didn't do the work on studying these players, like, how could you actually have an opinion on what the Bills did or didn't do in the draft? I think this is so critical. And that's why I keep saying, like, this is how I see it. This is how I see it. I've done the work. I feel like I've earned the right to have these types of opinions on these players. And so I just don't see the value for edge rushers as you get deeper into it. There's a couple guys I like. Like, I really do like Mo Kamara and Austin Booker, but the Bills don't have a 3rd-round pick. Will you pick one of those at 60? That's where it gets hard for me. And so if you have a chance to get one of those top 4 guys, it'd be tough not to make that your selection. So that's the edge rusher conversation. On the interior defensive line, I think it's really interesting. I'd love to get one of those top 8 if the Bills find themselves wanting to get a young player at the position for the rotation, which I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously you have Ed Oliver locked up. You have Daquan Jones signed for 2 years, but he's north of 30. And then your primary backups right now are Austin Johnson and Deshaun Williams, who are both, pushing 30 or north of 30, and they're 1-year players. So I think it would be really nice to have a rookie cost-controlled player in the mix at defensive tackle. The challenge here is that I feel like there's a decent amount of options throughout, but you'd like to get one, right? That's the thing, is you'd like to get one. I think there's a lot of teams that would like to get one. So might be a position you want to prioritize. At the safety position, I find it to be pretty consistent throughout the top 3 rounds. I think there's answers to be found. Maybe some of that pushes into round 4, which is good. Like, typically safeties slide a bit, whether that's in the draft, whether that's in free agency. I think you saw that, obviously. There's still good safeties out there that you can sign in free agency. And so I like how the safety board stacks up because if you didn't go with Cooper DeJean in the first round, who I think would be a heck of a first-round pick at 28, I think there's plenty of fallback options if you wanted to wait. And I think you can be patient and potentially be rewarded at safety. Again, if Cooper DeJean's there at 28, That's probably going to be the pick for me. If Chop Robinson's there at 28, that's probably going to be the pick for me. I don't know if either one gets there, and that's what opens up the trade back conversation. That's what opens up, okay, do we really like a particular wide receiver? That's kind of how I see that. But the interior defensive line safety distribution is pretty interesting. Cornerback is a position that we haven't talked a lot about until this moment. I really like this corner class, as you can see by the board. I've got plenty of options in the first round. I have like 3 first-round corners. Nate Wiggins is pretty close to a first-round grade for me. And then on day 2, I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 corners that I like. And I'll be honest with you, some of those guys that I have in round 4, I'm a big fan of as well. So if the Bills were looking for a young player at corner, which makes sense, they should. Rasul Douglas, last year of his contract, kind of an aging player. You probably want to enjoy what he gives you this year, and that's about it. And then, all right, well, is Kyer Elam going to be the guy after that? Maybe, maybe not. If anything, you still need depth. So I really like the top-end talent at corner, but then also the depth throughout rounds 2, 3, and 4. Offensive line, I feel really good about this class, especially in the 3rd and 4th rounds. I think there's a case to be made for some late first-round offensive linemen, particularly on the interior, looking at a guy like Graham Barton from Duke, Zach Frazier from West Virginia. I think those guys make a lot of sense to me. Even Jordan Morgan, if you really wanted to solidify this interior offensive line, if maybe you wanted to have some hedges against the transition of Connor McGovern to center and then David Edwards to left guard. I like Connor McGovern. I've only really ever seen him play left guard in the NFL. I don't know how good he is at center. David Edwards, I think of him as a starting caliber player, but he started 4 games over the last 2 years. So I think it's a worthwhile conversation. If you like a Graham Barton, if you like a Zach Frazier from West Virginia, pull the trigger on those players and, make sure that offensive line is stable. I will have no complaints about that whatsoever. And then I do think that you can find some really nice, appealing depth and guys with starter ceilings, particularly on the interior, like in round 4. I like Bo Limmer out of Arkansas. I like Tanner Bortolini out of Wisconsin. Cedric Van Pran from Georgia. Those are players I like. Even Hunter Norzard out of Penn State. Mason McCormick. There's some nice players here that I think you can get in the 4th round that have the ability to be immediate depth players and maybe even eventual starters for you on the interior offensive line. Last thing I want to talk about real quick is the running back distribution. It's an interesting situation. I have 4 day 2 prospects, none in the 4th, and then a bunch of specialist type players later on. I think that's okay in terms of how that aligns with the Bills' needs. And I don't think they have to get a big time talent here. I think they just need a piece to their rotation. But I'll tell you what, I really like Trey Benson out of Florida State. Really like him. He's a big, explosive dude that's physical, that sees the field well. Ton of elusiveness. If the Bills picked him at 60, I'm not sure I'd be mad about it. I just think him and James Cook would be a perfect pair. And then you could kind of figure out the rest from there. So I'm totally fine waiting on an Audric Estime out of Notre Dame in the 4th or 5th round. Kamani Vidal out of Troy, 5th, 6th round, something like that makes a lot of sense to me. I will say that a couple of players that I didn't love, Marshawn Lloyd out of USC, and he's got fumbling problems, and that really rubbed me the wrong way. And then Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin, that was a player that I wanted to like a whole lot more than I did. I just feel like his stop-start is just, it takes a while, and he doesn't get a lot of whip in his lateral cuts, and it takes him kind of a bit of a pause before he gets going again. And I don't know. I felt like for a guy that's like 230 pounds, like he went down pretty easy from some defensive back tackles. He's got some fumbling problems. I don't know. Like Braylon Allen, I know he had some productive seasons at Wisconsin. I'm a little bit concerned about him in the long-term forecast there, but there's plenty of running backs that I do like. I'm curious to see how they ultimately get picked and what the Bills do there. I think they will pick a running back at some point. Just a matter of, okay, well, do you want that big-time compliment? Or, okay, are you fine with more of a specialist type player to round out the mix? But the good news is there's options. I think that's what encourages me about this overall class. There's plenty of ways for Brandon Beane to get this done. And I know that we get the results of the draft in a choppy way, right? You get the first round, then you go to sleep, then you get round 2 and 3, then you go to sleep, then you get the rest of it. I think this is one of those drafts where you want to see the whole picture because you might be concerned about a particular thing, whether that's receiver, or edge, or safety, or whatever it is for you. But let it all play out and see what it looks like at the end. And I think there's so many different ways to go about this to get the answers that you're looking for in this draft. I think the distribution of talent for the overwhelming majority really aligns well with the Bills' needs. So there you have it. The Buffalo Bills 2024 draft board, at least through the lens of how I see things. I hope that this is a useful tool for you. I hope that you understand how to use it on draft night. And obviously, you have questions, hit me up. We'll be happy to talk it over with you. Plenty of great content coming the rest of the week. Tomorrow, our conversation is going to be covering the Buffalo Bills pre-draft visitors. They have the 30 players in for a visit. I kind of want to talk about them and give you some thoughts on them. All right. The Bills, for the most part, have been fairly consistent at drafting players that they bring in for visits. So I want to give you some thoughts on them. Thursday, we'll give you my final thoughts on the Bills entering the draft. And then, of course, the draft will happen and we will react to it. You'll get a podcast from me after the first round, after day 2, and then I will do an episode on all of the Bills picks on day 3. And those might be a little bit like shorter podcasts, 10 to 20 minutes. But I want to get this content turned around for you so you can really see how I view these picks and how they fit into the mix and all of that. So tons of content coming. Make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that you don't miss anything. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.